day, ladies and gentlemen, little sisters and brothers. News flash, news flash, news flash. We have been lied to yet again. Comes to find out, not every person with dark skin that came from Africa to the Americas were slaves. Those in question were given a special status just below the white man and just above the emerging mixed race community. It was these free people of color who later became the leaders in all facets of the emancipated black community. Little Miss Ivy and I, the Ivy Scribe team, through the plethora of historical evidence, knowledge of human nature, and plain common sense, the Ivy Scribe team perceives it was these very same free people of color spoken about throughout the American history books. They were our mortal enemies setting up shop to do exactly what our history book, the Bible, attests they would perfidiously do. In fact, the deeper we get into this, you will quickly perceive there was no way in Hades our captors and extortioners didn't know they were enslaving a specific race of people. You don't believe me, do you? Check it out. Perceptual context. Please understand, the common white man can only report on the evidence he has before him, meaning he thinks black is black and is trying to make sense of the obvious differences between what he thinks is one race of people. For this reason, they will resort to superficial differences like skin tone, mixed race, etc. But because the chosen are looking at the information through the scriptures, we should be able to pick out the obvious what in the history information. Check it out. According to Wikipedia, under Black Elite, quote, the black elite in the South of the United States started forming before the American Civil War among free blacks who managed to acquire property. Listen up and closely. Of the free people of color in North Carolina in the census from 1790 to 1810, 80% can be traced to African Americans free in Virginia during the colonial period. Free blacks migrated from Virginia to other states, as did their neighbors. Stop! Bingo! Behold, ladies and gentlemen, our enemy's port of entry, Virginia. Let's keep going. Listen up and listen closely. Quote, extensive research into colonial court records, wills, and deeds has demonstrated that most of these free families came from relationships or marriages between white women, servants or free, and black men, servant, free, or slave. Such relationships were part of the more fluid relationships among the working class before the boundaries of slavery's hardened. Stop! Bingo! What? You don't hear about this dynamic whatsoever, huh? We have two ways we can look at this information thus far, people. The first is that the white women in Virginia, and only in Virginia, loved them some big black caulk back in slavery times. And I mean some of that I will set your black ass free type of caulk. Or we can understand how all of this defies logic and reasoning to come to the conclusion our enemies came to America through Virginia with either white women in tow or they paid their servitude price and spread out across the land as free people of color. I'm good with either one you pick. Oh yeah, am I the only person who raised an eyebrow when it said, quote, such relationships were part of a more fluid relationship among the working class before the boundaries of slavery hardened? Which can only mean they were here before our ancestors were brought here. I mean, being in chains upon arrival is about as hardened as you can get, ain't it? So what time period could they possibly be talking about for a black man before slavery hardened according to the way the white man has us perceiving history? I ask that question. Let's continue for more clues. Now for the more traditional perception before we get to a whammy. Quote, during the 19th century, there were additional relationships between whites and blacks, not always of consensual nature. What is notorious is that white slaveholders could take advantage of slave women because of their power. There were also slaveholders who had caring relationships, common law marriages, and real marriages with black slave women, and who sometimes freed them and their children. Some slaveholders did provide for their mixed race children by ensuring they got education, although in other cases they were simply apprenticed to a trade or craft. Whatever property the father passed on to the child was important in helping that person get a start in life. The mulattoes patterned their lives after polite white society. Listen up and perceive through the scriptures, people. Quote, in the South, because of their head start in acquiring property, the black elite began to exercise leadership roles within the church, black schools, and community. But as in any society, there were natural leaders who rose up from many classes. The black elite also enjoyed the benefits. Listen to this. The black elite also enjoyed the benefit of living within the white neighborhoods, which further isolated them from the darker-skinned African Americans, which caused them to blame them for the downward shift in lifestyle choices. Stop. Bingo! I told you! They knew they were enslaving a specific seed of people. All other races could live as they please. Notice, even our ancestors recognized way back then who was truly responsible for the, quote, downward shift in lifestyle choices, which again backs up our understanding of dark-skinned people, Psalms 83 gang, already established here before our ancestors arrived, which just so happens to back up our recent Uncle Jeremiah 16 verse 13 understanding. Quote, therefore I will cast you off from this good land into a land which neither ye nor your fathers have known, and ye shall serve their other gods, with an S, who shall have no mercy upon you. Hence, the reason so many of us are black Muslims today. But our history discovery backs up this scripture to the jot and tittle. So in essence, our ancestors were well aware there was a difference between us and them. These are the people Dane Calloway and Lex will deceive you to perceive and believe are Israel living here before slavery. But all we must do is look at this matter with a little current understanding. For there is nothing new under the sun, and we are cursed to be hated, right? I mean, a colored living in the same neighborhood as the white man in the South during slavery? I mean, really? But wait! That was just the tricky part. Check out one of my big Fig Newtons. Now comes the proof of the second reprobate mind phase of the scriptures that we discovered recently. Quote, the civil rights movement and affirmative action brought about many changes for the black elite. As the old elite died away, it made room for the new black elite to emerge. Within its realm are the educated, the entrepreneurs, actors, singers, and those who comprise the top 9% of the elite status. Example, bingo. But wait a minute. According to Wikipedia, under affranchi, A-F-F-R-A-N-C-H-I, quote, affranchi is a former French legal term denoting a freedman or emancipated slave, but was a term used to refer pejoratively to mulattoes. That was three different classes, people. Notice that was three different classes of people that even they just mentioned. It is used in English to describe the was four. It is used in English to describe the class of freemen in Saint Domingue and other slave-holding French territories who held legal rights intermediate between those of free whites and enslaved Africans. Let me say it again. Who held legal rights intermediate between those of free whites and enslaved Africans. In Saint Domingue, I don't know how you say that. I guess I'm saying it right. Domingo. Roughly half of the affranchis were gens de couleur libres, free people of color, mulatto, and the other half African slaves. Again, notice how many different classes rolled up into one. Quote, the affranchis had legal and social advantages over enslaved Africans. They became a distinct class in a society between whites and slaves. In spite of the disadvantages, many educated affranchis identified culturally with France rather than with the enslaved population. A class in between, the free people of color sometimes had tensions with both whites and enslaved Africans. Listen up and proceed. Ambitious mulattoes worked to gain acceptance from the white colonists who held power in that society. As they advanced in society, affranchis often also held land and slaves. Some acted as creditors for planters. What? Let me go back and say this again. As they advanced in society, affranchis often also held land and slaves. Some acted as creditors for planters. One of their leaders in the late 18th century, Julien Ramon, an indigo planter, claimed that affranchis owned a third of all the slaves in the colony at that time. Example, bingo! Again, our oppressors think black is black, people, but it is obvious we are looking at our enemies setting up shop and doing exactly what the scriptures told us they were going to do. Thank you very much for looking at this understanding. Please keep listening to this particular series. I'm going to break it up because it was initially wrote as a fighting piece, but since little Miss Ivy now we don't fight anymore, except I do have to slap the living crap out of somebody or some people, but I got to make one of them rear his head up so I can put my hooks in his jaws and bring him forward so I can go ahead and do what I want to do to him. But until that happens, I don't fight anymore. So you may hear some little differences in the tone and within these things. I'm trying to soften them up, but a lot of them get through. Enough said. I'm rambling on. Thank you for looking at this understanding. By God's will, look for the next.